asking you kind of how strongly you feel about the role of the Treaty of Waitangi in policy development.
Yep.
And I feel very strongly that it has a very important role, so I put quite a strong answer there. And it must have a kind of a logarithm that says, therefore, Māori Party for you.
Yeah, and you pretty happy with that result, that indicative result?
You mean, will I vote for the Māori Party?
No, not necessarily. I just mean...
Oh, I'm not massively uncomfortable with that at all.
Yeah, right, okay. Any criticisms of it?
Yeah, I do think that it's missing... there's a big gap in it. There aren't really any questions about how you feel about poverty, income inequality or welfare reform. There's one about taxation, that's as close as it gets. But if those areas are the areas that really drive how you're thinking about voting and about what's going on in New Zealand, that tool doesn't really give you a way to express that.
Okay. Neville?
Yeah, I'd partly agree with the topics there. I found that all the questions are rather loaded to should the government spend more money on this or less, which of course frames the whole debate, rather than looking at it in more of a economic rationalist point of view. You know, how do you feel about the direction of the country, that kind of thing. And I think governments win and lose power on that, and I think that if there is a mood for change, as everyone I know is talking about, you look back and the Labor, in the last 3 elections that Labor won from opposition benches, 72 the economy was going up, so people feel that Labor does a better job at spending money when there's more of it about. The fact that it all crashed in a year or so after that's another thing. They got elected in 84, that's the contrary one, where they came in and found a huge mess that Muldoon had created with price controls and so on, and they did a very good job to reform that. And then 1999, which is another one where it was a tired government, they were making a lot of mistakes. It was Jenny Shipley and so on. Time for a change, and I think we're getting close to that tipping point again.
Okay.
Because the economy is very strong. People are feeling that we can tackle these issues like poverty, mental health and so on, that the government should spend more, but of course someone's got to pay for it, and I think you've got to get that part right before you start spending it willy-nilly.
So Bill Clinton was wrong when he said, you know, it's the economy, stupid. He was right, but he was wrong, because the economy... If it's
there's no real problem with the economy for most people at the moment.
But what you're saying is if it's going well, it won't necessarily make you vote for the incumbent party. It may make you think there's a lot of money to spend.
That's the point I'm making. Yeah, I can't prove that, of course, but that seems to be the way, because maybe we can spend it a little bit differently.
Okay, it's interesting. Sorry, Tracy, I thought...
Yeah, I was. Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, there are headlines for the economy that are good, but what is all so interesting at the moment around the Western world is the growing divide within the economy. And I think there are large parts of the electorate who are wondering about that. I might be okay, but is what's happening okay?
Yeah, you think that's gradually sinking in?
Yeah.
Very good, and very good to have both of you on the panel today. Tracy Bridges, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Neville Gibson, thank you, Neville.
Thanks always, Jim.
Thank you for your company, everybody, this week on the panel, and we are back on Monday. Have a lovely weekend. John Campbell is coming right up with Checkpoint shortly.
Kia ora everyone, tonight we're in Barcelona and the nearby city of Cambrai. 2 terror attacks, at least 13 people killed in the Barcelona one using a van. Can the Greens win Nelson, a seat held by Nick Smith, with a 7,000 vote majority? Donald Trump says American history and culture are being, quote, ripped apart by the removal of statues of the Confederate Civil War leaders and the black American experience of racism spanning generations and indeed centuries. Also tonight, the latest from Sierra Leone and Christchurch's adventure park for mountain bikers, plus what bad water is doing for an increasing number of stomachs. That's Checkpoint. Lots on the program between now and 6:30.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Spain has mounted a sweeping anti-terror operation after a suspected radical Islamist ploughed his speeding van into crowds in Barcelona, killing 13 people. And more attackers drove a car into pedestrians in a town south of the Catalonian capital. 6 people and a police officer were injured before 4 of the attackers were shot dead in the beachside tourist town of Cambrils. A 5th died later. The police say the jihadists had explosive belts and a bomb squad carried out several controlled explosions. Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the deadly rampage along Barcelona's La Rambla, the city's most famous avenue, which was packed with tourists and families taking an afternoon stroll. The authorities say the death toll could rise, with more than 100 people injured. Witnesses say the white van zigzagged at high speed down the boulevard, ramming pedestrians and cyclists and leaving bodies strewn in its wake. Security forces are hunting for the driver, who was seen escaping on foot. The police say the Barcelona and Cambrils attacks are linked to an explosion in the town of Alcanar, southwest of Barcelona, in which 1 person died. A police source says the residents there were preparing explosives. In Cambrils, Fitzroy Davis was having a night out in a bar when the attack unfolded, 7 hours after the slaughter in Barcelona. He found himself face to face with one of the terrorists before the man was shot by an officer.
They were shouting at him, and then they shot him, and then he fell to the ground. Then he came back up, and he was smiling at them, and then he came walking to the police. He was like taunting them, sort of thing, and then they shot him again, and that was it, and he went down.
Fitzroy Davis. The government says no New Zealanders are known to have been caught up in the Barcelona attacks. The Prime Minister has condemned the attacks and is urging travellers to be careful. But Bill English says travel and safety warnings for the area haven't changed, and people shouldn't let Islamic State scare them and affect how they live their lives.
I mean, I'm sure that's the effect that they're trying to have, is to make it look like everyone's under threat, and that's why it's important that we don't give in to that kind of pressure.
Bill English. And Donald Trump has responded to the terror attacks in Spain by citing a debunked story from the First World War. In a tweet, he's urged people to study what the American General John Pershing did to capture terrorists, saying there was no more radical Islamic terror for 35 years. This refers to a discredited story about the general who was said to have dipped bullets into pig blood, then used the bullets to shoot 50 Muslim prisoners. The blood of pigs was to block Muslims who don't eat pork from reaching paradise in the afterlife. Historians say there is not the slightest reason to believe General Pershing took this action. Mr. Trump was criticised when he repeated the tale during the presidential campaign in defence of his support for torture, such as waterboarding. Critics have responded to his latest tweet, saying while the rest of the world mourns the victims of the terrorism in Spain, the president has referred to a lie glorifying the execution of Muslim prisoners. The police say they're not ruling out drugs and gang-related activity as they piece together what led to the deaths of a Rotorua uncle and nephew. The bodies of Raymond Fleet and James Fleet were found in the Mamuku forest yesterday. They disappeared on Monday. Inspector Anaru Pewhairangi says the police are still trying to establish what happened, and a post-mortem examination will be carried out tomorrow. He believes there is no risk to the wider community. Mr. Pewhairangi says the families are devastated and have asked for privacy. Dunedin's boil water notice has been lifted after 3 days of clear tests. However, people are being told to flush all taps for 10 to 15 minutes to ensure no contaminated water remains in their systems. The government wants to sell Crown land in Queenstown in an attempt to dampen the town's hot property market. The average house price in Queenstown is now more than $1 million, with some first home buyers and young families priced out of the area. The government and Ngāi Tahu have signed a memorandum of understanding today to explore whether underused or vacant public land can be built on. It's 5:04. To sport, and the head of Cycling New Zealand says he wouldn't be surprised to see former rower Hamish Bond succeed on the world stage in his new sport. The two-time Olympic and 8-time world rowing champion has been selected for next month's World Road Cycling Championship in Norway. Andrew Matheson says 31-year-old Bond shows all the best qualities in a top athlete.
A champion's a champion, and I think what we've seen, we've been really impressed with Hamish is his ability to plan exceptionally well, do his homework, and then be absolutely committed to getting the job done. And I think, again, that's why he's been a 2-time Olympic champion, and we're sort of seeing it in this, environment as well, where he's taken that same mentality and applied it in a different sport.
Bond will ride the individual time trial at the World Championships along with George Bennett. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says it was a simple decision to rest Test veterans Jerome Kaino and Israel Dagg for tomorrow night's Bledisloe Cup opener in Sydney. Kaino and Dagg's absence makes room for Liam Squire and Damien McKenzie. Hansen says the All Blacks have a long championship campaign ahead and he has to manage his experienced players carefully.
Our last 9 weeks we go around the world twice, play 7 Test matches, have 10 time zone changes. You need most of your squad, or as many as you can get, still feeling somewhat fresh.
Steve Hansen, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life celebrates some country baking. We hold a candle up to Napier, or at least speak to a Napier woman who's teaching others how to make them. And there's a Sonic Tonic dedicated to the songs and sound bites of running. We've done it before, but that was another time, another race. On Nights, one more time around the block this week with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland scattered rain this evening and a period of rain tomorrow morning, possibly thundery followed by showers. Waikato, Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty. Mainly fine, but rain at times from tonight, heavy and possibly thundery tomorrow afternoon. And for the rest of the North Island, mainly fine, but scattered rain spreading south from tomorrow. And more widespread rain from Waitomo and Taranaki to Taupo. Nelson and Bulla, mainly fine, but some isolated showers. For Westland and Fiordland, rain clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine today, apart from high cloud and a few spots of rain in Southland and Otago. Cloud increasing tomorrow with patchy drizzle at night. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy at times, with some rain today and again late tomorrow. RNZ National at 5:07, and you're with Checkpoint and John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Nice to have you back with us. Coming up on the programme tonight, neo-Nazis in Charlottesville and the long, painful history of American racism. Can the Greens win an electorate seat? A rise in stomach bugs caused by dodgy water. The New Zealand lawyers acting for Afghan villagers caught up in a raid allegedly involving the SAS have gone to the High Court to try to force a government inquiry, and much more. Thank you for joining us. We begin tonight in Barcelona, of course, where at least 13 people have been killed and roughly 100 injured. The murder weapon, a van deliberately driven into crowds of people on what is perhaps the most famous street in all of Spain. A short time later, in the town of Cambrai, west of Barcelona, along the coastline, another attack and a police response that saw 4 or 5 people. Reports have varied, reportedly shot, dead. Spain has had terror attacks before, of course, in 2004. Train bombings in Madrid killed 192 people. With the latest on the dual attacks overnight, here's the BBC's Sarah Corker.
In the early hours of Friday morning, a dramatic gun battle on the streets of Cambrils, a town 68 miles south of Barcelona. Catalan police shot dead 4 people who they described as terrorists and are believed to be linked to the earlier van attack in Barcelona. The authorities say they've foiled a second terror attack, but 7 people, including a police officer, were injured when a car was driven at pedestrians. And hours earlier, in the heart of Barcelona, hundreds of holidaymakers, locals, shoppers ran for their lives. The white van ploughed into pedestrians on Spain's most famous boulevard. For half a kilometre, the van weaved from side to side, a deliberate attack on innocent people designed to kill, police said.
I saw a white van with the side door open. We heard gunshots. Whether it was the police or from the van, I don't know. Didn't hang around for that. We rang into the Burger King to get shelter.
What was going through your minds when it was going on?
Are we going to survive?
We were just scared they were going to get in there. They pulled all the shutters down. I've just kept us safe, and that was it.
I saw people falling to the ground, and that struck my eyes rather than at a car. And I immediately sensed that it was a Nice-like event. People around it ran away, fled away in panic.
Then the van driver abandoned the vehicle and ran away. Armed officers searched the surrounding area. Police have released a photo of Dries Oukabir, born in Morocco, whose documents were used to rent the van. However, latest reports suggest he has told police his passport was stolen. Late into the night, the city centre was on lockdown. 2 people have been arrested, a Spaniard and a Moroccan, but police say neither was the driver. The so-called Islamic State group said it was behind the attack. In another development, police are also linking an explosion on Wednesday in Alcanar in Catalonia with the Barcelona attack. 1 person died. Police believe those living in the house were preparing explosives. And as people anxiously wait for news of loved ones, the authorities have warned the number of dead may rise.
It's the BBC's Sarah Corker. Among the foreign journalists who've descended on Barcelona to cover the story is Matilda Nyberg. Matilda is from Expressen TV in Sweden, and when I spoke to her it was well past midnight and she was out on the street not far from the scene of the attack in Barcelona.
It's extremely quiet and actually a bit tense at the same time, because everybody knows about what has happened and it's obviously affecting the whole city. Barcelona on a Thursday night is usually very busy and loud, and now almost no one is out in the streets, which is kind of weird. And when I arrived at the airport a couple of hours ago, then I've been in the air a couple of hours also, and I've been disconnected from the social media for a while, and I noticed that a lot of people, among myself, were watching our phones and seeing these clips and pictures from this absolutely gruesome attack. And you can see that people arriving here today that lives or works in Barcelona, that they were very, very affected about what has happened here today.
Well, 13 people dead and more than 100 injured. It is a terrible toll. Was there a sense that this would happen at some time in Spain after events in France? Were Spanish people prepared for this at some level, or is it taking them completely by surprise?
Well, it's difficult to say. I think that everyone in Europe at this time is actually prepared for a terror attack because it has been, unfortunately, so common for the past couple of months, especially. But I think that Spain, in a way, has it hasn't happened here as much as it has happened in, for example, France or the UK. So I think that, in a way, that you weren't really expecting that it could happen here, and at such a large scale. I mean, this van plowed through the most popular tourist street in all of Barcelona. Hundreds, if not thousands of people were here, and he managed to drive quite a long way along this road. So I think that people are in a great state of shock.
It's such a willful act of hate, isn't it? And not only is it not only is it kind of Barcelona's spine in a way, which means locals are there, but it is the street in Barcelona I would have thought that tourists were most likely to go to, right?
Yes, it is. It is that kind of place, but also some locals, but I mean, definitely mostly tourists here. And this is a popular city for Swedish tourists. A lot of Swedes spend their holidays here, and also other people from other European countries. And this is like the prime time of Barcelona. August, it's still very warm, but not that overwhelming heat that you can get in July. So this is the time where it's actually the most people in this area.
As we speak, it's apparent that police have killed what are being described as suspects in a town called Cambrai, which is a wee way away from you there. Are they suspects in this case? Are they thought to be connected to this attack in Barcelona? Or was there another attack about to unfold? Do you know? Has that been clarified yet?
It has not been clarified at this point, but we know that earlier today, the citizens of this city, Cambrai, they were told to stay inside and stay calm. So something has obviously been going on there for a while, and there has been a lot of police during the late hours of the evening and into the night. But what we know now is that the police has confirmed that they have that there has been a shooting and that people have been killed by the police, and they say that these people are suspected terrorists. They have not yet confirmed how many suspects were killed in the city, which is about a bit more than 2 hours away from Barcelona, but 2 hours south of the city. And Spanish media reports are saying that there are 4 or 5 people killed, but this has not yet been confirmed. And there are also reports that a number of police officers were injured during the operation. But as you asked about if this operation had some sort of connection to what happened earlier today here at La Rambla, that has not been confirmed either, even though that is a suspicion among a lot of people.
That's Matilda Nyberg, a Swedish TV reporter who had descended upon Barcelona to cover the attack there. Some clarity has come in since we had that discussion about what happened in the town of Cambrai, south of Barcelona, along the coast, along the west of Barcelona, along that coastline. Police shot dead 5 attackers who were staging another attack in a smaller vehicle. It's been reported 7 people were injured in that attack. 5 attackers shot dead by police, about 120k along the coast from Barcelona. 6 civilians and 1 police officer hit by the car in that attack, but no one killed there. 13 dead in Barcelona, although reports suggest because of the extent of some of the injuries, the death toll is expected to rise. We will be back in Spain later in the program. All of the Dunedin Hospital prostate cancer patients who've waited too long for their urgent surgery will now get the operation they need before the end of the month. Earlier this week, Southern DHB released an external review into its urology department, as Checkpoint has been reporting on at length, both before and after the review. It's feared long waiting patients may have been exposed to increased clinical risk as a result of their wait. With resources stretched, personnel short and theatre times insufficient, Checkpoint repeatedly asked the Southern DHB why it wasn't making greater use of the local private facilities to reduce the waiting time, very long waiting times in some cases. This afternoon we got a call from Mercy Hospital CEO Richard Whitney.
We have had confirmed today 5 urology cases with the intention of them being undertaken by close of August. Clearly there's a willingness to progress and start to resolve the backlog, and we would like to think there will be more that may follow.
That's Richard Whitney from Mercy Hospital. The Southern DHB has told Checkpoint tonight it's committed to moving forward as quickly as we can. That's the Southern DHB's words in terms of addressing the issues facing the urology service. It says an action plan is being developed to implement the recommendations of its review, and that starts with getting surgery for all the overdue patients, which is very good news for them, of course. Paul Schofield is one of them. He's spoken to Checkpoint often these past few weeks since we first began covering the story about 3 weeks ago. He has prostate cancer and has been waiting for surgery since March. Now, last Friday, Dunedin Hospital called to tell him he'd get his surgery. October 9th was the date. That was good. Better than no date. But then
I got another call a few days later saying that they were bringing my surgery forward to the 23rd of September, which was even better. And I thanked them for that and said that's great news. And then I had a call just yesterday from the senior urology surgeon, and he asked me if I'd like to have my surgery done next Wednesday, which is the 23rd of August, at the Mercy Hospital. And I thought, well, that's marvellous. That's marvellous. And I'm so pleased to hear that the other blokes are involved there too. And this is not before time, you know, this could have been sorted out with a bit of common sense and a bit of compassion.
Paul Schofield. So, Southern DHB, Dunedin Hospital, very much attacking that waiting list in the wake of the review that was out this week. It's 90 minutes past 6. There's no, past 5. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. There's no doubt the Green Party has taken a hit in the past month. Its own leader has said the party has neither been great nor together, which had been the party's slogan, of course, before they changed it at the weekend. The Greens are trying to win a seat, an electorate, for the first time since 1999 when Jeanette Fitzsimons held Coromandel. City Councillor Matt Laurie is taking on long-time incumbent National Nick Smith, who's held the Nelson seat since 1996 and what was called the Tasman seat for 2 elections before that. First elected to Parliament in 1990, Nick Smith. His majority is 7,600 votes. That's a big mountain for the Green candidate to climb. We wanted to catch up with Mr Laurie today, but he was too busy with paperwork, so we sent our Nelson reporter Tracy Neal to check the pulse of this Nelson electorate.
Veteran politician Nick Smith launched a string of new special housing areas in Nelson and Tasman today. He was also meeting with constituents and holding meetings which form part of his usual electorate duties that he's been doing almost every Friday for the past 27 years. Dr Smith became National's Tasman candidate in 1990, and 6 years later, when a large slice of Tasman was merged into the neighbouring Nelson electorate, he became the Nelson MP and has held the seat ever since. Almost 30 years as an MP, and he says today is an exciting time as any to be in politics.
Oh, it's going to be energetic, and it certainly has got a lot more exciting with all the political machinations that have occurred over the last month. The Green Party had targeted the electorate, and that certainly had created a bit more excitement.
Dr Smith says the latest news about how far the Greens have dipped in the polls has changed the election dynamics. The latest One News Colmar Brunton poll shows support for the Greens has dropped from 15 to just 4%.
Well, I think for the Green Party, they started with a hiss and a roar, but having lost one of their leaders, having them plummet in the polls, I think has made them less relevant to this campaign.
Matt Laurie told RNZ recently he believed he had a real chance despite Nick Smith's popularity. But that was before Materia Ture resigned as co-leader, and polling results showed the party had taken a massive hit. He wasn't available to speak with Checkpoint today. Slumping below 5% in some polls, there's now speculation the party might not get through on the list and would indeed need to win a seat. So we asked people on the streets of Nelson if they are more likely to vote Green for that reason.
Yes, my party vote's going to be with somebody else, but I'm going to go for the candidate here in Nelson.
Probably not. I was thinking I'd probably vote maybe National because that's what my family votes.
I'll vote for our local man, but I wouldn't vote for the party. I just think he's been out and about, and I like what he says.
Probably not. I'm thinking more Labour, just because of their policy around student loans. And being a student, that's a big thing.
Haven't decided yet, so yeah, I need to do a bit more research. And
yes, I'm planning to vote Green. I think we need to have that voice in Parliament. I'm not sure how it's going to pan out for them, but
the Nelson electorate extends south along the eastern coastline of Tasman Bay and includes Nelson City, Richmond, Hope and Brightwater. At the last election, the National Party also captured a plurality of the party votes in Nelson. Perhaps Mr Laurie's strongest supporter is former Green MP Mike Ward. He was outside his Nelson art studio this morning when we caught up with him and asked his thoughts.
I'll vote for Matt, yes. Oh, look, I think he's put in the hard yards here. I think he's a committed and principled individual. I mean, I think we have a lot to thank Nick for as well. He's been a very hard-working local MP, but our worldviews are different.
Dr Smith says despite the latest news on the Greens, he's not taking anything for granted. Labour's Rachel Boyack and ACT's Paul Hufflett are also in the race for the Nelson seat. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
A trio, there's a lovely Nelson bus track underneath me. It sounded very busy in Nelson. A trio of top New Zealand lawyers is trying to force the government to investigate whether the SAS acted illegally in a 2010 raid on 2 villages in Afghanistan. Now, journalists Nikki Hager and John Stevenson say 6 civilians, including a 3-year-old girl, were killed in the raid. But the government has insisted there was no wrongdoing by the military and has refused to hold an inquiry. Next stop, the lawyers hope the High Court. Here's Zach Fleming with more.
Lawyer Deborah Manning speaking about her Afghan clients who say they were at the centre of the deadly 2010 raid. Miss Manning, along with Rodney Harrison QC and Richard McLeod, filed papers at the High Court in Wellington this morning, seeking to force the government to launch an independent inquiry into the raid, codenamed Operation Burnham. Their judicial review application focuses on two key points.
One, decision by government to decline to hold an independent inquiry into the Operation Burnham events and subsequent cover-up, and secondly, a decision of the Chief of Defence Force. The only decision that the government made was simply to refer the issue to the Chief of Defence Force, who had already taken a position.
Rodney Harrison says the Chief of Defence Force was biased, and his inquiry rejection goes against both national and international law.
What effectively seems to have happened is that rather than decide on the merits the call for an independent inquiry, the government simply referred the matter to the Chief of Defence Force for a very narrow question. We say that the Chief of Defence Force was the wrong person to make that decision, and the decision that he did make to do nothing was flawed because he had already taken up a position that the allegations were unfounded.
The Hit and Run book alleges the government covered up its Operation Burnham raid on 2 villages in the Backland province in 2010, namely that 6 civilians were killed, 15 wounded, and property deliberately destroyed. Immediately after the book's release in March, opposition MPs called for an independent inquiry, and in June the United Nations Committee Against Torture issued the government a please explain. Neither the Attorney-General nor the Chief of Defence Force would comment today. Miss Manning says she's in regular contact with the 3 villages she's representing, and she's seeking name suppression for them to protect them from the Taliban.
It's a hard thing to sort of describe when someone's been a victim of, human rights violations. You can never say that they're pleased about proceedings being filed because, they have suffered a lot and they continue to suffer to this day from the devastation of that evening. But they are certainly relieved that further steps are being taken.
A hearing date is expected to be set for around February next year, but even a ruling in favour of the villages may not force an inquiry. It may only force the government to take another look at its decision not to hold one. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Coming up to 27 minutes past 5. The number of people contracting nasty stomach bugs in Auckland is spiking after every storm, prompting health authorities to look at whether the city's sewage system is making people sick. Real pressures on stormwater in some parts of Auckland. The alarming new figures come from the Auckland Regional Public Health Service, which has now launched a study into why it's seeing increases in diseases like cryptosporidium and certain types of E. coli. Rowan Quinn reports.
Toilet paper, condoms and tampons regularly wash up along Meola Creek, which winds from Mount Albert to the sea at Point Chevalier. It's one of the outlets designed to serve as a wastewater overflow in heavy rain, meaning raw sewage flows into the creek along with the stormwater and out to sea. Auckland's Medical Officer of Health, David Sinclair, is leading the investigation into whether such overflows could be making people sick.
Typically, we would get notified of sort of 60 to 75 cases a week, but in the couple of weeks after some of the storms, that could be sort of 80 plus.
Those numbers are likely to be the tip of the iceberg, though. Dr Sinclair says the figures are only from specimens analysed in labs. Most people with gastro symptoms don't see their GP, and even fewer would submit a sample for analysis. But he says there are some very unpleasant illnesses in the statistics.
Cryptosporidium gives abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhoea, and can be quite debilitating sometimes for maybe a couple of weeks. The more serious one is the B-Tech, S-Tech one, which can lead to some very severe complications, bleeding with the diarrhoea, and very uncommonly, but very severely, a few people can get kidney failure from it.
Dr Sinclair stresses he's keeping an open mind about what's behind the spike, saying there are some inconsistencies, like no peaks in the waterborne disease Giardia. But he says the sewage overflows have long been a worry for the Public Health Service. The Auckland Council says it always has public safety in mind and advises people to keep away from wastewater outfalls and stream mouths for 48 hours after heavy rain. The Roy Clements Treeway runs next to Meola Creek at St Luke's. It has overflows almost twice a week some years. And while there are permanent warning signs saying to keep out of the water, most of these regular walkers didn't know about the frequent overflows.
Some people like swim in it.
I'm not very happy about the thought of sewerage going up and down the creek.
Every time I walk through here, there seems to be a different colour within the water. If it's causing illness within the community, it's not a good thing, obviously.
I think it's kind of disgusting.
The research is in its very early stages and will be done in conjunction with the Auckland Council, Waitakere, Niwa and Auckland University. I tāmaki makaurau, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up on the program, the mongrel mob says the police are stopping them searching for 2 friends missing in the Kaimanuas. This is the case of the 2 men who drove off from the police and haven't been seen since. And Auckland High School opens its op shop for ball season. A lovely story from Laura Tupou coming up. A less than lovely story from the Philippines. 58 suspected drug dealers killed in shootouts across one province in the past few days. Duterte's blood-soaked war on drugs. We have more on that later in the program. The Black American experience of racism, not only in Charlottesville but going back centuries. We have business next with Nona Peltier. The Spark result, a goodie, I think, Nona. We're going to talk about that. Yep, but before all of that, the 5:30 headlines at 5:30 with Anna Thomas.
Thanks, John. A massive anti-terror operation is underway in Spain after a radical Islamist plowed his speeding van into crowds in Barcelona, killing 13 people. Security forces are hunting for the driver, who was seen escaping on foot. Later, more attackers drove a car into pedestrians in a town south of the Catalonian capital. 6 people and a police officer were injured before 5 of the attackers were shot and killed. A day of mourning has been declared for the terrorism victims. A teenage girl who was badly burned in a house fire explosion in South Auckland has died after 2 months in hospital. 3 people were injured when they tried to light a cigarette after sniffing petrol at a home on Lappington Road in Rotorua. The police say 15-year-old Kelly Amani died in hospital last Friday. Dunedin's boil water notice has been lifted after 3 days of clear tests. However, people are being told to flush all taps for 10 to 15 minutes to ensure no contaminated water remains in their systems. Crown land in Queenstown could be sold off in an attempt to dampen the town's hot property market. The average house price in the tourist resort is now more than $1 million, with some first home buyers and young families priced out of the area. The government and Ngāi Tahu have signed a memorandum of understanding today to explore whether underused or vacant public land can be built on. The police are not ruling out drugs and gang-related crime as they piece together what led to the deaths of a Rotorua uncle and nephew. The bodies of Raymond and James Fleet were found in the Mamaku forest yesterday. The police are still trying to establish what happened, and a post-mortem will be carried out tomorrow. And Ngaio Gorge Road in Wellington has reopened after being closed earlier today by a landslide. The steep gully road was only reopened on Monday after a landslide at the end of July. And that's the news.
So it opened, closed, and then
now,
reopened.
Yes.
Thanks, Anna
You
Thomas.
got it.
Excellent. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. Hi, Nona.
Hello.
Telecommunications company Spark reported a better than expected full year or half year? Full year,
Full year,
profit.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it was a bit better than expected, but on the other hand, there were some other pieces in there that made the market go, maybe not, so not too sure. In the end, the share price ended even, so there was like no change. So at first, the market was a little unsure. The top line looked pretty good. So the company's...
So what was the top line? What was it?
Yeah, their net profit rose 13% to $418 million. That included, though, a one-time gain of $20 million. They sold a piece of land they didn't need in downtown Auckland on Merrill Drive.
$20 million for a piece of land in downtown Auckland?
Mm-hmm.
Must have been the size of a postage stamp.
Pretty much. A little bit more, 20 times more the average house in Queenstown.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's an extraordinary number, isn't it?
It
to
really
segue
is. Yeah, $1 million.
$1 million.
What does it get you today?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so they sold that. What was it, 418 million overall?
Yeah, it's still quite, it's not bad. But look, Simon Mutter said that 2018 is going to be a year of investment for the company. They need to make a significant investment in upgrading their digital services because customers are demanding a whole lot more. So they're saying, well, we're going to invest in 2018. That means that our profit will be about maybe 2% up on the year we just reported, and revenue may be 3% up. So, but he said that if we make this investment now, in 2019, we'll be able to get even better, bigger growth, and it would be significant. And he said, really, that's how it goes with telecommunications and digital services. It's very investment intensive. There's a lot of demand. One of the things he talked about was the fixed broadband network. Well, that's, you know, the fiber that people are getting. Well, there's not a lot of margin in that. It's just a price-driven commodity. It's sort of like shopping around for energy for your home. You choose what's cheapest, and that's exactly what's happening in that market. So it's difficult to add value to those services, spend money on giving customer service or customer experience. So they're focusing on their wireless network. They think that that's where they can really add some value because those are high-value customers.
Add some value or add some profit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So it's a tough business. That's the bottom line there.
Yeah.
Yeah, what else do we got?
I don't know. Well, how did the weekend? No.
Well, before we get to that, well, I can tell you the weekend actually rose a handful of points to another record. 3 points only to a record 7,874, which isn't too bad because Asia's looking a little bit on the rocks right now. And that's partly because Donald Trump's policies don't look like it doesn't seem to the market that he'll be able to fulfill his promise on policy because his house is in disarray.
Disarray. His business councils have fallen over.
Yeah.
Senior Republican figures are speaking out against him.
Yeah, it's all of those things. And so the U.S. dollar stalled. Markets a little bit concerned about risky investments. Meanwhile, you know, the New Zealand dollar, it's held steady. We're still really in that same holding piece, whereas the U.S. dollar is falling. Other markets, there's dollars, you know, values of currencies are moving around. The New Zealand dollar is steady at 73 cents, 92.4 Australian, 56.6 pence. I said the Spark share price was steady at $3.92. And, you know, we've got a really big week ahead. It's the biggest week on the reporting calendar coming up. And we've just got so many companies. I don't even know where to begin. I mean, they're like the 3 of the 4 biggest power companies. There's the travel businesses, Auckland Airport, Air New Zealand, Tourism Holdings. Oh, I have a list. Wait. Entertainment companies, Sky Television, Publishing, NZME, the cinema company Vista, food and beverages Comvita and King Salmon. We've got shipping and transport companies, Port of Tauranga, Flyway, New Zealand Refining, EBOS. Oh, it just goes on and on.
All of them reporting next week.
Yes, and you'll have Giles telling you all about that.
Well, thank you for doing such a fine job of this week, Nona Peltier, and have a wonderful weekend.
And you.
Nona Peltier, our business reporter here based in Auckland. Volunteer rescuers from the mongrel mob are criticising the police's efforts to rescue 2 men lost in the Kaimanawa forest in the central North Island, of course. The volunteers say authorities aren't being open with information, but the police are emphatically rejecting that claim, saying they're doing all that they can in difficult circumstances. Emile Donovan reports.
The pair, who the police are still refusing to name, have now been missing for 6 days after fleeing into the Kaimanawa forest following a police pursuit last Saturday. On Sunday, they called 111 asking to be rescued, but there's been no sign of them since, beyond a burnt-out campfire and some abandoned clothes scattered nearby. But the officer in charge of the search, Tony Jurison, says calling the search off isn't an option at this stage.
It's not even a consideration yet. There's a protocol and criteria that we have to go to, and while we're still finding things and while we've still got things to do, we aren't able to suspend the search.
However, the search hasn't been without controversy. The missing men are believed to be associated with the mongrel mob, and some members have been trying to help with the search. But a member of the gang's Palmerston North chapter, Michael Wahanui, says their efforts have been obstructed by the police.
Like only drip feeding us information when we're trying to tell them we found the dog's markers, our brothers left markers up here. We're telling them that and they're not even saying nothing. We know no one's gone up there because they're still, you know, as it is, as we left them.
And another member, Clevedon, says from his point of view, the police are not doing everything they can.
They're coming out now on sunny days. It's been 6 rainy days. You ain't seen them for the last 3 days that we've been up here. Now it's sunny, they come back. Our brother could be lying somewhere dead. They chase him in the bush for a car. A car is something that they can replace, you know. Our brother's life is not.
Tony Jurison says he can understand the frustration, but he's had good feedback from the men's whānau.
We've had open and honest communication with the whānau. Key members of the whānau, we meet twice a day, every day. They understand the position and they understand the process and the procedures we are working through.
The pair are lost amid some of the most inhospitable terrain in the country. The leader of the search and rescue team, Cliff Jones, says anyone who isn't properly dressed for the conditions will be having a tough time.
The clouds to the ground, it's very cold in there. It's starting to snow in the top sections. If you weren't equipped, as the search and rescue staff are, to handle those conditions, I think you'd be experiencing some problems in there.
Meanwhile, the police dive squad today began searching tributaries of the Tongariro River, hoping to find some sign of the pair. The officer in charge, Senior Sergeant Bruce Adams, says the search is focused on figuring out where the men could have fallen in.
Essentially, we're going to be getting in the rivers, getting in the streams, checking all those, because you can only see so much from the surface. And what we're looking at is where, obviously, where anyone could fall in, unfortunately, and that's what we're looking for. Plus, obviously, any items that may have been discarded by the pair as well.
The search will continue into the weekend. For Checkpoint, Ko Emil Donovan Tene.
Let's go to the Philippines now, where 58 suspected drug dealers have been killed in shootouts across one province in just the past few days. It's all part of a resurgence in President Rodrigo Duterte's blood-soaked war on drugs. Police have conducted dozens of so-called buy-bust operations in which undercover police attempt to buy illegal drugs from suspected dealers who either end up arrested or, in what seems like summary executions in many cases, simply dead. Since coming to power in June last year, Duterte has unleashed an aggressive crackdown on drugs that has left at least 3,500 alleged dealers and users dead. The BBC's Jonathan Head reports.
One night, 26 dead. President Duterte's war on drugs is back with a vengeance. As so often before, the police say they fired in self-defense. As we arrived here in San Pedro, explained this police officer, 2 men shot at and fought our officers. That's why they were killed. The police are calling this a one-time, big-time anti-drugs and crime operation. Another like it the night before killed 32 people. As before, these killings occurred in poor neighborhoods, the focus of the drug war from its start. President Duterte was forced to suspend the campaign back in February after police officers were found to have murdered a Korean businessman. But he offered no apology for restarting it. The 32 who died in Bulacan, that's good, he told this group of anti-corruption volunteers. If we could kill 32 every day, maybe we could fix this country.
Another 32 every day, then maybe we could reduce the...
When he launched his drug war last year, the president promised to end the problem within 3 to 6 months. He now says he was over-optimistic. That deadline has long since passed, and still the killing goes on.
That's the BBC's Jonathan Head reporting from the Philippines. The Māori owners of Poroti Springs near Whangarei have told Green MPs today of their anguish over water and the prospect it will be sold to China. We were in Nelson following the Greens earlier in the program. Now we are in the north where Greens leader James Shaw and MP Marama Davidson were today. They were welcomed onto the marae at Poroti this afternoon. Lois Williams went along.
It was a small reception committee, but it included the heavy lifters of Wharatiri Hapu who've been planting, fencing and defending rivers and Poroti Springs for decades. They've had to watch from the sidelines as some of the purest water in Northland has been allocated to orchardists, the Whangarei Council and more recently to Auckland businessmen who want to build a bottling factory to supply Asian and domestic markets. The Wharatiri Māori trustees own the springs and they're worried about the combined effect of the water take. Donna Edmonds, who grew up fishing and playing in the springs, wept this afternoon as she told the Green MPs what the springs used to be like and the huge armfuls of watercress she would gather as a child.
We can hardly get a pack and safe bag of watercress anymore. And memories of what used to be is so sad. It would be like telling my mokopuna, you could catch freshwater crayfish down there, don't like that. Back in the day you could dive off the trees and into the streams. Now I can hardly even put the water cones up to my ankles and I cry for my people.
The Poroti people made only one glancing reference to the Greens' recent turmoil at the top. One elder politely hoped it would soon be well behind them. Kaumatua Hona Edwards said there were more pressing problems for the earth and for Poroti in particular.
So it's important that the local kakariki comes to Poroti because the environment, the taiao, is screaming.
Poroti is the home marae of Milan Ruka, Northland's well-known river campaigner. And while the logging trucks roared past the marae, he pointed to the photos on the wall of his father and uncles who served in the army. He told the Greens how the springs had dried up twice in the 1980s when the council took too much. He told the Greens it was intolerable that more water is to be sucked out of the aquifer that feeds the springs and shipped off to China.
Our fathers here, 15 Māori battalion here served in World War II. There's many of the soldiers here that have served, come from this marae, and they fought for our values, they side by side with Pākehā, fought overseas. So, we're not a people to stand by, what do we do if we see foreigners over here taking water and our streams drying up?
The Greens leader James Shaw told the Poroti people it was critical that the party was part of the next government to put a stop to the decline in freshwater quality and unsustainable water takes. He said people all over the country shared similar feelings to Poroti's Donna Edmonds and her sadness over the changes to the waters she loved as a child.
It was deeply heartbreaking. I was very moved to hear that, and sadly it's not uncommon across New Zealand. I mean, that is why I'm fighting this election so hard, because we have been saying this for years, that we're over-allocating water, we're polluting the water, and the communities who have relied on that water for generations no longer can.
If the Greens do retain their foothold in Parliament in September, James Shaw says they'll be pushing to stop all new water bottling applications and impose royalties on existing ones. For Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
It may be small consolation for those of you reaching for a box of tissues or flu medication right now, but experts say while flu is definitely circulating this winter, there's significantly less than average for this time of year. They also say it's probably peaked and should be on the way out. Our health correspondent Karen Brown starts her report with a chat to Wellingtonians about how they fared.
Horrible. Half our office has been done with it.
And I did get it this year, and it did seem to persist for a long time.
Not for me personally, but definitely for people at my work and wider friends. Like almost hospitalised bad.
I haven't even had a cold this year.
Just coming off the flu now. It's just kept me bedridden for a bit, yeah. I call it the man flu, so I feel better about it.
Last year, New Zealand recorded its lowest flu season since the year 2000. This year, there's more flu about, but levels are still well below average for winter. The current rate is 46 cases of influenza-like illness for every 100,000 people, compared to the average winter rate of 100 cases. No one's disputing that it's kept hospitals busy, with patients having to wait in ambulances in some places because of a lack of space in emergency departments. But the director of the Immunisation Advisory Centre at Auckland University, Wellington GP Nikki Turner, says the worst is likely to be over.
We are likely to have peaked with the worst part of the winter flu, and we would expect now that flu rate will continue overall over the next few weeks to start declining.
The Institute of Environmental Science and Research says rates of flu-like illness and hospitalisations are decreasing. A strain known as AH3N2, which tends to hit older people hard, is still predominant, followed by a B strain and 2 non-virus strains. The ESR Medical Director, Virginia Hope, says together it's enough to leave people feeling flu has hit them hard this winter.
There are a number of non-influenza viruses that can cause illness, like rhinovirus and respiratory syncytial virus. And so people might have some illness that's related to those conditions, as well as influenza itself.
Dr Nikki Turner says it's been a standard flu season, but there has been a lot of illness around and people think of it as flu.
Yes, there is flu around in New Zealand right now, and we have a reasonable winter burden of flu. Alongside that, we have a lot of other circulating respiratory illnesses, and it's very hard for someone to know whether they've actually got flu or whether they've got some other nasty respiratory illness.
Free flu jabs will remain available until the end of the year for those who are eligible in high-risk groups, including pregnant women. Dr Turner says for those people who haven't already had the jab, it's still worth doing, even though flu will diminish as spring approaches.
We will still see flu over the next few weeks, and you do still see flu into the spring. So my recommendation for those who haven't received their flu vaccine is go and get it. You will still develop protection a week, 2 weeks after you've received your vaccine. So go and get it.
The latest tally shows 1.21 million doses of the vaccine have been distributed, slightly behind the total this time last year.
It's our health correspondent Karen Brown. Donald Trump says American history and culture are being, quote, ripped apart by the removal of statues of Confederate Civil War leaders from across the southern states. The deadly violence in Charlottesville, Virginia a few days ago was sparked when far-right nationalists protested the removal of a statue of General Robert E. Lee, who was commander of Confederate forces in the US Civil War. The BBC's John Campbell reports from Leesburg, Virginia, where a statue of a Confederate soldier in front of the county courthouse may be the next to come down.
Does this statue represent heritage or hate, dignity or division? Last night, this monument to a Confederate soldier, the army from the South in the US Civil War that fought to maintain slavery, was vandalised. Today, authorities decided it was time to install closed-circuit TV to keep a watchful eye on the monument. And this famous landmark of this pretty town was dividing opinion, just as it is across the country. Do you believe the statue should come down?
No, I don't.
Why not?
Like I said, it's history. It's not good history, but it's a reminder of what not to repeat in the past.
It's a shame. It's a darn shame, you know, that they had to nitpick stuff like this.
Should these statues stay or go?
I think they should go.
I believe the statue should go. It's a representation of past actions that have shackled and chained people both mentally and physically.
But it's not only this Vietnam vet saluting these monuments. Today, Donald Trump entered the fray, tweeting, "Sad to see the history and culture of our great country being ripped apart with the removal of our beautiful statues and monuments. You can't change history, but you can learn from it. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson. Who's next? Washington? Jefferson? So foolish." Jews will not replace us! It was plans to dismantle the statue of General Lee that sparked these hate-drenched scenes in Charlottesville at the weekend, which left one person dead. No doubt these people will be cheering the president to the rafters for his comments today. But in Durham, North Carolina, those people who believe these statues are symbols of America's dark past are taking matters into their own hands. There are statues like this all across the southern states of America. Yes, they represent history and heritage, but that's only part of the story. They're also about the toxic state of race relations in America today and the continuing search of African Americans to find equality and respect. An old soldier who now seems to represent an America uncomfortable about its past, divided about its present, uncertain about the future.
John Campbell in Leesburg, Virginia. After 6 o'clock, we will look again at race relations in the US. Christchurch's adventure park for mountain bikers is promising to rise from the ashes and reopen this summer. The $20 million network of trails, complete with a chairlift, flying foxes and a cafe, had to be closed just 8 weeks after opening after that Port Hills fire swept through the area. In fact, multiple fires. The park was wildly popular with locals and represented a beacon of hope for the city as one of the first big developments to open post the earthquake. The park's operations manager, Mike Johnson, told Con & Young they were down but not out.
We're focusing on the lift and the zip lines. So the lift line is being repaired. The new haul rope is here. So we'll let Doppelmayr get on with their task of recertifying the lift for us. The zip lines are something else we're working hard on. We're just waiting for stuff to come along. We're working on towers, working on the sites. So that's going along nicely. And then on the trails, it's kind of a start-stop situation with the logging going on. We're working around the loggers. They're working well with us, but there's a lot of work to do. So we will have trails. We're just not sure what they'll look like just yet.
What's the importance for you guys of actually trying to get open by summer at least?
Summertime is the busiest period. We were open last summer. We had an awesome time. So definitely want to be open again for this summer.
And look, bit of a roller coaster, to put it mildly, a roller coaster ride for you guys. You were open 8 weeks. It was just a storming success, wasn't it? And then to have the fire happen and now you're trying to rebuild. I mean, how do you keep the energy levels up?
Just keep looking forward. There's a job to do. Just keep moving forward. We want the park back, and that's what we're going to just focus on.
And as well as getting in some of that new equipment, you're starting to advertise for positions and things like that?
Yeah, there's a couple of job postings. As we get closer and we have a better idea of who we're going to need, we'll start posting for those jobs.
And for people out there, keen mountain bikers, people who sort of maybe even had given it a go for the first time with this park coming along, who are looking forward to this happening, I mean, what can you say to them about, how confident you are at getting open by summer?
We'll be back.
The extent of the damage to the village, it's pretty minimal, isn't it?
Yeah, the fire didn't actually affect the village, so the village is still standing the way it was before. It'll open, you won't even notice that there was a fire in the area. If all you look at the village is that, if you're just looking at the village from the right angle, you won't know there was a fire here.
Wow, extraordinary. And so that was obviously, there was a lot of work went on to try and protect the village at the time.
That, and yeah, we were lucky. They put the fire breaks in to protect it, and the crews did an amazing job. When the fires were coming through, the fire department kind of staged themselves in the right spots and did an awesome job keeping it away from the village.
And if you just managed to hold on to a few of your workers, haven't you? How many have you still got here?
I'm not sure, actually. We're sitting at probably about 30. Right after the fire, we had to do those layoffs, but we've held on to about 30 of the crew, and they're working hard.
And so, what sort of, do you have to do some team talks, get a bit of pep talk after these fires to try and get people, motivated to try and go through all of this again? I mean,
we do have our talks, but as a team, they're a really tight-knit group. They all believe in the park. They all want to see the park back, so they're very self-motivated.
That's the Parks Operations Manager, Mike Johnson, talking to our excellent Christchurch reporter, Conan Young. High school students are gearing up for ball season, but for one South Auckland school, they're also trying to keep costs down. James Cook High School in Rotorua have set up a ball op shop thanks to donations from the public, where rather than buying something expensive that you can only wear once, students can hire a special outfit for the big night. Our reporter, Laura Tupou, went for a look.
In a room at the back of the school, there are clothes racks filled with dresses and suits. There's jewellery and shoes for the girls, makeshift dressing rooms, and a guarantee that those wanting to go to the ball will have something to wear. Year 13 student Ashley Abelvi says the shop's open to students at break time.
We've set it up that anyone in our school can come and have a look, come and try them on. If they don't want them, that's fine. Otherwise, they just sign a form that they can take them for the night and then bring them back a week later.
Principal Grant McMillan says the donations are flooding in.
I believe about 150 dresses have come through already, about 30 shirts, there's been 12.5 suits, I think, there's been shoes, there's been other things as well, and it looks like over half of those things have come in have also gone out again to families and to students.
Sia Lafua Tu'uao says she's been visiting the shop but hasn't found the right dress yet.
I haven't really found my size, so I will be back next week to have a look, because usually every day there's new stock coming in.
Ashley Abelvi says the evening can be quite pricey.
Dresses range anywhere from I'll say $80 to anywhere up to $500. I know girls have told me about their dress prices, and then shoes are $50. Makeup can range from $50 to $200, so it can get real expensive, and I think this is a good opportunity for the ones that don't want to spend as much but still have a good time.
Sia Lafua Tu'uao says this year will be much less stressful than last year.
We had to go different wardrobe shops, and it was pretty hard, but this is like a closet, like school closet, where you can just try clothes on and then dress it up. so then it doesn't really look similar to anyone wearing it next year.
Brenda Paul says the shop is popular with the students and some of her friends.
Oh, but this is a nice one. It's really cool. The students will come in here and then they'll go outside and like tell all their friends about like this if people don't know about it, and then they'll like come in and it just gets like really packed in here, and it's pretty good. Yeah.
Have any of your friends found anything good in here and hired one out?
Yeah, a few of my friends actually. Like you come in here and then like they're like trying it and they just like walk out with it and they're like, I'm wearing this the ball, and it's really cool.
About 200 Year 12 and 13 students will be at the ball next month, and Mr McMillan says once the night's over, he'll talk to other local high schools to see if a central op shop can be created for students to pick out ball outfits each year. Mō te hotaka o te ahiahi, ko Laura Tupou aho.
Lovely piece, Laura. Feedback from Mike Gray. It's great to hear the Southern DHB are resolving their backlog of critical urology patients. Credit to your team and the patients. But why did it need such scrutiny for this organisation to do something about people's lives being put at risk? Surely this is their primary function. The question should now be, what's broken in our health system and how do we ensure it isn't happening elsewhere?
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The authorities in Spain believe the deadly van attack in Barcelona that claimed 13 lives and left scores injured was part of a planned series of terror attacks. The police killed 5 men wearing explosive belts after they tried to drive a vehicle into pedestrians before it overturned in the seaside town of Cambrils, 7 hours after the slaughter in Barcelona. The ABC's Lara Corrigan reports.
Police say 5 suspected terrorists have been killed in Cambrils after their car was reportedly driven into pedestrians, injuring 7 people, 1 critically. Police say the attackers were carrying bomb belts and a bomb squad has been called in to perform controlled detonations. Meanwhile, in Barcelona, police are still searching for the driver of a van that mowed down a crowd on La Rambla, killing 13 people and injuring more than 100 others, including 3 Australians. Police say both incidents are linked to an explosion at a house in Alcanar on Thursday, where it's believed a homemade bomb was being prepared.
Lara Corrigan reporting. And the Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy is calling the attacks in his country the work of jihadist terrorists.
I want my first words tonight in Barcelona to be of sympathy and solidarity with the victims of this attack. I also want to underline the solidarity of the whole of Spain with the city of Barcelona, hit today by jihadist terrorism, as other cities have been before.
Mariano Rajoy says several European cities, including Brussels, London and Paris, have all experienced the same pain and insecurity as Barcelona has today. The lawyers acting for Afghan villagers caught up in a raid involving the New Zealand SAS have gone to the High Court to try to get a government inquiry. Earlier this year, journalists Nikki Hager and John Stevenson claimed civilians were killed during a 2010 raid on 2 Afghan villages involving SAS soldiers. Rowan Quinn reports.
The government has said it won't hold an inquiry, saying there was no wrongdoing by the military in the raid in which Nikki Hager alleges 6 civilians were killed, including a 3-year-old girl. But the lawyers acting for several of the villages say the decision not to hold an inquiry is unlawful. They have today filed papers seeking a judicial review. One of them, Deborah Manning, says there's nothing worse for the victims of a traumatic event than someone denying that event ever happened. They are seeking name suppression for their clients, saying they're worried about their safety. Ko Rowan Quinn, DNA.
A teenage girl badly burned in a house explosion in South Auckland has died after 2 months in hospital. 3 people were injured when they tried to light a cigarette after sniffing petrol in the house on Lappington Road in Rotorua. The police say Kelly Amani, who was 15, has died and the matter has been referred to the coroner. The Auckland Council is urging people to avoid swimming for 2 days after heavy rain, after it was revealed cases of stomach bugs peak after major storms. The Regional Public Health Service is looking at whether the city's ageing sewers are contributing to a spike in gastro-infections such as Cryptosporidium and E. coli. Anita Blake-Person reports.
Auckland's Medical Officer of Health, David Sinclair, says there are usually between 60 and 75 cases of the illnesses reported a week, but after a big storm that number is consistently higher than 80. He says those problems are likely to be the tip of the iceberg, as most people with gastro problems don't see their GP. Dr Sinclair says he's keeping an open mind about what's behind the spike, saying there are inconsistencies. An Auckland Council spokesperson says people should not swim for 2 days after storms because wastewater from heavy rain can overflow into waterways. Cornita Blakeperson, TNA.
Mangawhai ratepayers embroiled in a rates row with their regional council are celebrating tonight after a win in the High Court. In the dispute spanning more than 6 years, as many as 1,000 ratepayers refused to pay in protest at ballooning debt levels and the council's failure to disclose its borrowing to fund the Mangawhai wastewater scheme. Justice Al Sadafi has now ruled the rates levied by the Northland Regional Council via the Kaipara District Council rate demands were invalid. The head of the Mangawhai Ratepayers Association, Bruce Rogan, says he couldn't be happier and it could have an impact on other councils.
Unless they remedy the problems that they've got in their documents, then they're open to the same challenge that we have successfully lodged against the NRC rates, and all of their rates could be declared invalid.
Bruce Rogan says it's cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's been worth it. It's 6:05. To sports, and the Wallabies are promising to play traditional running rugby in pursuit of a Bledisloe Cup boil-over against the All Blacks tomorrow night. The Australians believe the only way to end a 5-test losing run against the world champions is attacking the All Blacks and starving them of possession in Sydney. Their coach Michael Cheika has deployed an electric backs combination of trio Bernard Foley, Kurtley Beale and Israel Folau. The Wallabies skills coach Mick Byrne says the players want to back their fitness and are going to play a running game in Sydney. Last year's Mitre 10 Cup champions Canterbury are in Nelson tonight to begin the defence of their premiership title against Tasman. The clash is a repeat of last year's final, but Canterbury halfback Jack Stratton says they won't be taking anything for granted.
It's a new year and a new group of boys, and each year that's a challenge in itself. There's a proud history behind Canterbury Rugby and the recent success, and like I said, every year is a different group, and we'll just see what this year looks like.
Meanwhile, the dumped All Black Julian Savea has been named on the right wing for Wellington's Mitre 10 Cup season opener against Manawatu on Sunday. And the Warriors coach Stephen Kearney is confident his team can pick up wins in their remaining 3 NRL games. Despite sitting on a 6-game losing streak, Kearney says he's seen improvements from players in his time at the club. The Warriors take on the South Sydney Rabbitohs in Sydney tonight. And that's the news.
Tomorrow morning, bioethicist Julian Savulescu on our obligation to engineer ourselves as best we can. He says using the word unnatural as pejorative doesn't work anymore. Peter Bradley, who ran the London ambulance service before coming here to run St John, and Australian author Charlotte Wood on the nature of things. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland, scattered rain this evening and a period of rain tomorrow morning, possibly thundery, followed by showers. Waikato, Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty, mainly fine, but rain at times from tonight, heavy and possibly thundery tomorrow afternoon. And for the rest of the North Island, mainly fine, but scattered rain spreading south from tomorrow, more widespread from Waitomo and Taranaki to Taupo. Nelson and Bulla, mainly fine, but some isolated showers. Westland and Fiordland, rain clearing tomorrow morning and becoming fine. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine today, apart from high cloud and a few spots of rain in Southland and Otago. And cloud increasing tomorrow with patchy drizzle at night. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy at times with some rain today and again late tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 6:08 and you're listening to John Campbell and Checkpoint.
And Anna Thomas, yes. Also on Checkpoint. Thanks, Anna Thomas.
Thanks, cheers.
Nice to see you. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you.
Back to Europe now. Today's attack in Barcelona using a vehicle as a weapon to mow down pedestrians is one of at least 7 such attacks to have been carried out in European cities over the last year or so. Attacks like this are really hard to prevent given the design of cities, the pedestrian-friendly nature of modern cities and the fact that all you need is a vehicle. The BBC security correspondent Gordon Correra has this report.
Barcelona is just the latest in a series of vehicle attacks. leaving a terrible but tragically now almost familiar scene on the streets of Europe. The first major incident was in Nice, when a lorry ploughed into a crowd celebrating Bastille Day just over a year ago. It was a target and moment to maximise the casualties and the impact. Then there was a lorry attack on a Christmas market in Berlin and a van driven into the city centre of Stockholm. And Britain has not been immune from what's been dubbed low-tech terrorism. In March, Khalid Massoud ploughed into people on Westminster Bridge before being shot dead as he approached the House of Parliament with a knife. In June, 3 men drove down London Bridge before attacking people in Borough Market with knives. And later that month, worshippers near Finsbury Park Mosque were struck by a car. 1 man died. The problem is that stopping these kind of attacks is hard. Here at Westminster Bridge, they've installed barriers to stop vehicles ramming into pedestrians on the bridge. But an attacker could just pick a different crowded place. The authorities are also looking at things like more checks on people making short-notice rentals of vans. But the problem is these attacks require just everyday items, just a car, no guns or explosives. And with so little planning required, it can be hard to spot them and stop them. New shock-absorbing barriers may offer some protection, but counter-terrorism experts caution they cannot stop all attacks happening.
It's an almost impossible thing to prevent completely, but you can try to make it a little bit more difficult for the terrorist, and that, to some extent, is all that we can do. The way we stop this from happening is by preventing people from becoming radicalised, or by people being willing to come forward and saying, I know someone that might be going to do this, because that's how we stop it.
Tonight, so-called Islamic State said what it called its soldiers carried out the attack, responding to its call. But this does not always mean there was a direct link with the group. And one major concern for security services around the world is that these kind of attacks can be carried out with little or no training, direction or coordination.
Gordon Carrera reporting. Last weekend, of course, a car was driven into people in Charlottesville, Virginia. This morning, as we've been hearing, a van was driven into people in Barcelona. What those events have in common is the weapon and also the enmity. These are hate crimes. The terror in Europe, fueled by Islamic extremist groups like IS and Al-Qaeda, is relatively recent. In America, the roots of this race hate can be traced back to the Civil War and, of course, well before. Slavery, lynching, segregation, the assassination of African-American leaders like Medgar Evers, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And on Saturday, the death of an anti-racism protester, Heather Heyer, who was white, but protesting against and killed by white supremacists. Yes, the striking message from America is how long hatred can survive. A warning, some of the language in this report is confronting. It could be Barcelona this morning. It was Charlottesville on the weekend. The same crime, born of hatred, to drive a vehicle into strangers.
Let's just mow down all of these people.
Vice News has made an extraordinary fly-on-the-wall documentary about what happened at Charlottesville. It's utterly, terribly compelling, in part because of men like Christopher Cantwell, a white nationalist who says things like this.
I'm not even saying we're non-violent. I'm saying that we didn't aggress. We did not initiate force against anybody. We're not non-violent. We'll fucking kill these people if we have to.
And a short time after he said that, someone did.
Just ran down all of these people.
So, just days apart, in Barcelona and Charlottesville, vehicles driven into people, fueled by hate. Earlier this week, a journalist named Robin Wright wrote an extraordinary piece for The New Yorker with the title, "Is America Headed for a New Kind of Civil War?" In part, she approached the question,
as someone who's covered wars my entire life, dating back to the 1973 war in the Middle East.
And after Charlottesville, she told me,
it is haunting to look at the kinds of wars that are playing out abroad and think that we face some of the very same problems in the United States today.
So what do these events have in common? Is it the anger from the margins that fueled them? I asked Robin Wright. You wrote a book called Rock the Casbah, Rage and Rebellion Across the Islamic World, and in part that considered the radicalisation of people at the edges of the Islamic world? Are we seeing a kind of radicalisation of some of the sorts of white people who might participate in neo-Nazi alt-right movements in the United States?
It's a good question and an interesting comparison. Obviously, our societies are very different. The flashpoints couldn't be more different. But the idea, the alienation, the marginalization of a group of people who feel that the politicians are not doing enough for them, that they have to take action into their own hands, and they feel emboldened. They feel that they don't have other recourse. I think there are some similarities there.
But Robin Wright says there is a difference, and it's history.
The difference with the United States is that we went through a very violent and devastating existential civil war 150 years ago. And what's occurring to a lot of people who've studied conflict and who've studied the Civil War is that we may never have answered some of the basic questions that emerged during the Civil War.
Remember, events in Charlottesville began because alt-right white people, including neo-Nazis, came from throughout the United States to oppose the removal of the statue of Robert E. Lee, a commander in the Confederate Army during the Civil War. 152 years after his surrender, the divisions the Civil War spoke of still, at some level, in some hearts, exist. Among the abuse hurled at people by white nationalists in Charlottesville was the N-word, still. Nina Simone from 1966, its famous opening line.
My skin is black.
Half a century later, Jay-Z has sampled it.
My skin is black.
Building it into a new song about the experience of being black.
Light nigga, dog nigga, faux nigga, real nigga, rich nigga, po nigga, house nigga, field nigga.
Have you ever been called the N-word?
Absolutely. On my job. Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's Tanisha Hudson, a young woman from Charlottesville who was there on Saturday when the violence broke out. I saw her in that brilliant Vice documentary in which she said, "I don't know what other way to put it. I stand here as a young black lady and I feel like I'm living through Jim Crow." Our producer, Bridget Burke, found her number and I called her.
I knew about Jim Crow because my grandfather grew up in the heart of Scottsdale, Edmont, Virginia. Edmont, Virginia is a small town outside of Charlottesville, about 20 minutes south of Charlottesville. My grandfather experienced his own racism. So his stories he passed down to us.
And here's the confounding thing. Those were historical stories from her grandfather, but the language the white supremacists brought to Charlottesville over the weekend and the names Tanisha Hudson has been called again and again are the same. And when they call you that, they're doing it with hate, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Pure hate.
In short, slavery ended, the lynching stopped, a black president was elected twice. But Tanisha Hudson will tell you the hatred hasn't ended. She saw it on the weekend in the faces of the people who came from throughout America to Charlottesville, out of her grandfather's history and into her present.
They were about hate. They can make a million excuses and say that they were not about hate. They can make a million excuses and say that they're not racist. Everything they stand for is hate.
Which brings us back to Robin Wright.
So 150 years later, we're still dealing with the aftermath of the Civil War, and that's what's become clear to so many Americans in the last 3 days.
Robin Wright says the American lesson is that it can and does continue to happen. Old enmities surviving, tribal hatred finding expression through new and reinvented forms.
Now, when people talk about another civil war, nobody's talking about what we went through in the middle of the 19th century which was fighting from trenches with neat geographical boundaries in pitched battles. So, civil wars, as you know as well as I, have evolved, particularly over the last 60 years, where they're played out not on front lines. The locations shift. There's episodic violence. It's not every day fighting one side against the other.
And now in Europe, the same kind of shifting locations, episodic violence and hate from within. Brussels, Paris, Nice, Barcelona. It can't happen here, people said, but it can and it does. And what America can tell you is that hatred survives. Robin Wright, journalist, read me a quote from Murat Halstead, journalist, that's a century and a half old.
And Murat Halstead wrote, "The lesson of the war that should never depart from us is that the American people have no exemption from the ordinary state of humankind. If we sin, we must suffer for our sins like the empires that are tottering and the nations that have perished." Americans have always thought of themselves as an exception, and now we're finding we're not.
My skin is black.
Nina Simone and Jay-Z ending that report. Before that, Robin Wright, and you can read her excellent journalism in The New Yorker. It's coming up to 20 minutes past 6. Mangawhai ratepayers battling the Kaipara District Council over dodgy rate demands are dancing a jig tonight after a significant win in the High Court. We're going to explain all of this. Justice Duffy has ruled that the Northland Regional Council's rates included in Kaipara rate demands for the past 5 years were invalid all up. That's about $500,000 worth. You might remember that Parliament swooped in a few years back and passed a special bill to legalise the faulty Kaipara rates after the Mangawhai sewerage scheme debt fiasco. But wait, there's more. That bill did not validate the portion of those rates that Kaipara collected on behalf of the Regional Council. So Bruce Rogan and the Mangawhai Ratepayers Association have been doggedly challenging the councils ever since in courts. In an interim decision last year, Justice Duffy found the NRC had made serious and substantial errors when it delegated the job of collecting its rates to the Kaipara Council. It didn't state dates for payment, for instance. It tried to piggyback its other legal obligations onto the Kaipara rate demand. And in her final decision, Justice Duffy has quashed all the NRC's Kaipara rates since 2011. It doesn't have to pay them back, but it can't reissue them either. Bruce Rogan told our Northland reporter Lois Williams the Mangawhai rates rebels couldn't be happier with Justice Duffy's decision.
She is essentially saying that there are laws written for the conduct of councils, and councils are required to follow those laws. And if they don't follow them, then they lose their power to collect rates.
So how important is this decision, do you think, Bruce, for the Mangawhai ratepayers, but in general for ratepayers?
I think it has immense implications for ratepayers from one end of the country to the other. For example, I'm a ratepayer in Auckland as well as Kaipara and NRC, and I have studied the current Auckland rates demand, and it has numerous defects in it that would make the rates unpayable. And I have advised them that that is the case. I'm not saying I won't pay the rates, but I am saying that unless they remedy the problems that they've got in their documents, then they're open to the same challenge that we have successfully lodged against the NRC rates, and all of their rates could be declared invalid. And if someone wanted to raise the validity of their past rates, exactly the same thing could happen to them.
Well, what's going on with councils? I mean, are they just getting sloppy? Is it just cavalier attitude to getting things right, or do they genuinely not know they're doing the wrong thing?
They don't care because they've got their view is that they've got two ways to avoid being accountable. One is that if they really discover that they've got something wrong, they just turn to the government and the government will pass retrospective legislation fixing up whatever went wrong, as in Kaipara and Nelson and many other situations. And the other avenue that they pursue is that they know that they've got an infinite amount of money and the ratepayer hasn't, so no individual ratepayer is going to challenge their decisions, because it's going to cost that ratepayer $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 with the chance of recovering $2,000. And so they just rely on the fact that they've all the power is on their side.
How much does this cost you personally? You and Heather, your wife?
Oh, we've put in best part of $100,000 of our own money, I suppose, now, and the community has put in another $200,000.
$200,000.
Yeah.
Was it worth it?
Of course it's worth it. If we want to live by the rule of law, we have to pay whatever it takes to ensure that the rule of law is enforced. You put a value on it at the point where you run out, which is what councils always rely on.
Bruce Rogan talking to our Northland reporter Lois Williams. Let's head south a bit from Northland to the Waitakere Ranges, where the local board says, well, it's criticised suggestions to turn the ranges into a national park, saying it isn't the answer for fighting Cody dieback disease. Last week, an Auckland council report said the closure of several of the park's tracks was simply not working to prevent the disease spreading. Its author said it may not be possible to prevent the spread of Cody dieback without entirely banning the public from visiting it. In response, the Deputy Prime Minister, Paula Bennett, mooted the idea of turning it into a national park to boost resources. However, the Deputy Chair of the Waitakere Ranges local board, Saffron Toms, told our reporter Tom Furley that's not what's needed.
It needs to stay in local ownership. It's owned by the people of Auckland, and it's been a process of building up the park since about 100 years ago. So there's a big local interest in this area, in region-wide, and we need to keep it accountable to the people of Auckland. And additional to that, with this government's track record on national parks, we certainly don't share the view that making it a national park will make it more protected.
It seems as though her argument is that by putting it as a national park, there will be more resources available to stop the spread of Cody dieback. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the Waitakere Ranges is already protected under an Act of Parliament passed in 2008. You can't have a higher protection than that. And also, as a regional park, it's protected under an order of council, so that's also a very, very high protection. There's absolutely no reason why more resources shouldn't go into the area right now under the designations that it already has. And additional to that, Cody dieback is a nationwide problem of huge significance to the whole of New Zealand. So we don't believe that there's any reason why we shouldn't be getting utmost resources and attention.
So in terms of more funding, where does that need to come from? Is that coming from the council, or does that need to come from more of a national government level?
I'd say both, absolutely both. But the national government level, the nationwide government level, has a lot more funds in its coffers than the council does. And we just haven't been seeing it on the ground enough out here. Council's biosecurity staff and team have done an amazing job with the resources that they've got, but they just simply don't have enough.
The Deputy Chair of the Waitakere Ranges Local Board, Saffron Toms, talking to Tom Furley. A mass burial for about 300 people killed by a mudslide and flooding has taken place on the outskirts of the Sierra Leone capital, Freetown. President Ernest Bai Koroma attended a multi-faith memorial service at the burial site in the city of Waterloo. Some 600 people are still thought to be missing, while more than 400 people are known to have died. About 3,000 people are homeless in what's been described as a humanitarian emergency. The BBC's Martin Patience is in Freetown.
In preparation for the burial, dozens of young men dug more than 200 graves with shovels. The cemetery was last used during the Ebola outbreak. Now they're going to bury hundreds of people who died in the devastating landslide. The country's president, along with several of his ministers, are expected to attend the service. Some of the bodies have been identified by families, but many of them are expected to be nameless. One health official summed up the national mood.
This is the worst disaster I witnessed in my life, and we are praying that a short thing will not occur again in this country.
An hour's drive from the graveyard at the scene of the landslide, anger is growing over the government's response. Many are hungry with little food or access to clean water. Hundreds of people have been left homeless by this disaster, and many are sheltering in half-built homes, left to fend for themselves.
That report from the BBC's Martin Patience in Freetown. It's 28 minutes past 6. It's coming to an end of Checkpoint for the night and for the week. A lot of feedback tonight. Thank you. US has a real problem with racism, but tearing down a few statues isn't going to make any real change. Just makes some folks feel good. I'm just going to have a little cough, if you bear with me for one. Excuse me. And this from another person, I can't help but feel we're looking too hard at one side of a conflict. Why did a statue of a well-respected general need removal? Hatred begets hatred, and we all owe it to each other to acknowledge that which fuels hatred. And now I'm going to have a drink of water for the same problem. The end of the week can't come soon enough. And Claire Bracken sent us the following. Robert E. Lee did not want any statues erected to him. He wanted the country to heal itself. Another listener sent us their thoughts. Stop calling them white supremacists. They are white inadequates, blaming everyone else for their own failings. Lovely to hear from you. Thank you. We really enjoy your participation in the program, whatever point of view you're coming at us with. If you want to text us on 2101, we're always thrilled to get your texts. You can email checkpoint@Radio NZ. We are, of course, on Twitter and on Facebook, where enormous numbers of people are watching stories after the program has gone to air. Some stories getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of hits. We're really delightful about that. That's a new audience for Radio New Zealand, and we are thrilled, in some cases anyway, and we're absolutely thrilled to have them. That is the end of the program for the week. On behalf of our fantastic, hard-working, inspirational and tireless team, we'd like to wish you a really fantastic weekend, and we hope that we will be reunited with you at 5 o'clock on Monday night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Barcelona attack may have been part of a planned series of terror attacks. Aucklanders are warned to avoid swimming for 2 days after heavy rain, amid evidence that stomach bugs peak after major storms. A teenage girl badly burned in a house explosion caused by sniffing petrol has died after 2 months in hospital. A High Court win for Mangawhai ratepayers embroiled in rates row. And the government wants to sell Crown land in Queenstown to rein in the town's hot property market. Our next news and weather is at 7. But now it's time for Trending Now, our feature highlighting the stories you've been sharing via digital and social media. First up, this from Kim Hill on Saturday.
Department of Conservation biologist and photographer Corey Mosen has been working with the world's only true alpine parrot, the Kea, for nearly a decade now.